Hi everyone, my name's Josh Gallagher. Welcome back to The Loop Live this week. And this is a really exciting one this week. I'm going to be joined by a couple of people soon who are going to talk about a really interesting topic. And it is a real insider's view into some of the bigger challenges that are facing marketers at the moment. And the reason why I think it's really interesting is in the last few editions of Loop Live, we've talked a lot about the acceleration of habits, things that people were already doing pre-pandemic that now they're just doing more of, things like buying more online. What's really interesting about today is we're going to talk about behavior change. And there has been some really big behavior changes that have happened that are going to have an effect on marketing and media industry as we come into the future. And one of those topics which we're going to talk about today is co-viewing and the re-emergence of the family unit as people spend more time at home over the pandemic period. I know that it's happened to me. It's been a really great thing of the pandemic, being home more, being able to see my kids and spend more time with them. And of course, I watch more TV with them. We interact on screens more, and that's just been something that we do. And it's a really interesting behavior change that we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce a couple of people onto the panel today to take us through some insights from some research and a really good view of how this has changed. If you do have questions, I'm sure people will have a lot of questions from their own experience and how this affects them. You can put it in the comments and we'll try to answer it later in the questions. So now I'm going to hand it over to the experts to talk about it.
Hi, thanks for inviting us on today. I'm Alice Almeida from Totally Awesome. I head up the Research, Insights and Data Department. And I think Josh kind of touched on it briefly, but one of the areas of today's conversation or presentation is going to be around the co-viewing audience and the re-emergence of the co-viewing audience. And we're lucky enough to be joined by Amanda Abel, who is our pediatric psychologist. So obviously we have a lot of the media insights and data side of this, but we also have the really smart side as well with Amanda being involved. So we've actually got the psychology of it all. So we've got people, what they say they do, and then we've got Amanda to kick in and to kind of touch on how actually humans are behaving and reacting. So do you want me to just jump straight into the presentation?
Let's get started.
Yeah, sounds good. So one of the things that we noticed going into COVID was the family unit was becoming very segregated. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but finding where a lot of people were becoming very independent and individualized with the media that they consume, thanks to the wonderful world of the mobile device and the tablet, even for that matter. So we were noticing that kids within family units were interacting by themselves on a small screen, and the whole fun of sitting down with your family and watching, you know, I think if I think of my childhood, watching Fawlty Towers with my family around a TV set, that kind of connection that you're getting as a family unit was actually starting to decrease and to become extinct, to be dramatic. So we started to notice this worrying trend, and that's why we wanted to kind of cover off exactly what was happening throughout pre-COVID and what COVID has done to impact this trend that we saw. So we've got some data here just to have a look at the device access for kids and teens from 2016 through to 2019. Now, 2016 is the yellow charts, and as you can see, TV has had a significant drop as the preferred device for kids and teens. And then you've seen smartphone and tablet all see a growth there. So we're starting to see that kids were moving towards those individual platforms where they could just be entertained by themselves. And, you know, it's not a great user experience to cram the whole family around a mobile phone. And so the kid was actually just jumping on and using the device by themselves. And we did start to see that there was a strong decrease in co-viewing. It was down 11 percentage points from 2018 to early 2020, right before COVID started. So it was quite a worrying shift, and Amanda will go into this into a bit more detail around the psychology and the importance of a family unit doing activities together later on in the presentation. So this presentation is not at all about cyber issues and, talk about data privacy. That's something that I could talk about for hours and hours and hours. However, today's presentation is all around co-viewing, but it's really important when you're talking about kids becoming very independent on a single device, such as a mobile phone. They're more likely to come across cyber issues when they're doing it themselves. So there's things like being served inappropriate content. There's cyberbullying, which is actually a huge concern for a lot of kids and teens. But there's also inappropriate posts that the kids may participate in or share without knowing it. And so without that family involvement or that family participation, these things were more likely to occur, which was just adding to the concern of everyone becoming very siloed in their media consumption. And look, COVID has been and still is incredibly difficult for many families and for many people worldwide. But if we were to look for a silver lining, and sometimes I believe that you really have to try and see the silver lining, it would be that COVID actually started to stop this trend in its tracks. So where we were seeing families becoming very siloed and independent with their media consumption, we saw that COVID came on board, and due to a forced lockdown and basically being stuck inside a house with your family unit, it actually forced families to shift back into the mindset of doing activities together. So we saw that worrying trend stop in its tracks when COVID hit. And what we saw was actually quite interesting. And it's funny, before I had a kid, I wouldn't think that kids would have much influence over purchases. But I say this every now and then, whenever I purchase the wrong thing from my daughter, I very quickly learn just how powerful she is in the purchase influence. If I come home with the wrong pineapple juice, I go back to the shops as quick as I can to get it. But what we noticed was in this period of COVID lockdown, kids and teens are having a much stronger say in, random household purchases. So we saw a really strong growth from 2019 to 2020 across all categories. Those in the 0 to 5% year-on-year growth were things like snacks and movies and cinema tickets and event concerts and toys and stuff like that. But the categories that we saw the strongest growth, there are a lot of entertainment products that you can obviously do from within your home, such as gaming apps, TV subscriptions. They were also having a say in laptop and desktop purchases, toiletries, clothes and footwear. And although holidays for most are off the cards, there is obviously a little bit of domestic travel that's still going on. And we're seeing that kids are having more of an influence in that. So when it comes to purchase influence, it seems to be that parents are now just there to pay for it, but it's actually being dictated by the children themselves. We actually also saw during COVID that family units were interacting online more than ever before. So when we asked them about what type of media activities do they do with their child, if you have a look at the pre-COVID and then you look at COVID time, you can see that during COVID, there's actually been a rise in families watching videos together, playing games together, watching TV series, watching cartoons, and the use of apps. The use of apps has actually gone, the growth has been phenomenal. So we're seeing that families are now interacting with different media sections quite a lot more than they were pre-COVID. And this is because as I said before, when you're locked and confined into a small space with children and you have to try and entertain them somehow, that sometimes just sitting down and watching some good content together is great. I know that when I can put my hand up and say that I possibly know every single word to Frozen and Moana, like I'm sure loads of other parents do. But, at the end of the day, if you had to, sit down and just kill some time, watching a movie together was actually really good. And you know what, I started to see, I'm not making this too personal, but I started to see a difference in my daughter in particular and the positivity and the change of behaviours just purely because we had so much more time for her. So that's what we saw was quite interesting from a media perspective. But what we're seeing is that the co-viewing has continued to grow family time in 2021. Now, I know that there's still a lot of places which are still in lockdown. Some have gone back into lockdown. Sorry, Melbourne. Our thoughts are with you. Sorry, Amanda. But what we saw is this really positive shift with the mindset. So when we surveyed parents, 51% of parents were actively participating in their kids' online activities during that period. What were they doing? 58% said they're watching YouTube with their kids daily. 37% were playing video games with their kids daily, and 36% were watching movies with their kids daily. So they're pretty big stats for daily activities. And then 58% of parents are participating more with their kids' online activities than they were 12 months ago. So there was this worrying concern pre-COVID that their parents weren't being too involved with the kids' online activities, and that is when the concern was growing around data privacy and kids being exposed to content that they shouldn't have. But now that parents are becoming a lot more involved, we're hoping that that will kind of prevent any of those cyber issues, that we mentioned before. And we're obviously seeing that this is benefiting the whole family. So, from the parents themselves, we asked them what their favourite activities to do, and 79% were watching movies as a family. Sorry, these stats are quite hard to see. 63% enjoy playing video games as a family, and 61% were viewing social media together. So we started to see parents really enjoying interacting with cross-media with their children. Then from the kids' side, and this is one of the aha moments, and this is one of the stats which, I sometimes you come across a stat and you're like, oh, this is amazing. From my opinion, I believe that this is the stat. So 92% of all kids across APAC enjoy participating in online activities such as games, movies, and social media with their parents. Because I'm sure if you ask a lot of parents, the parents will be like, yeah, no, my kid doesn't want to play that with me, or my kid wouldn't be interested in that. But in actual fact, 92% of kids are really enjoying it. So if you're doing it, continue doing it. Even if they say that they're not enjoying it, keep doing it, because, clearly they still are. But also another stat was 41% of kids rated watching video movies with their parents as their most favourite activity to do. So let that sink in. 41% said that watching content with their parents was their most favourite activity to do. So there might be this mindset that kids don't want to participate, but in actual fact, what we were seeing is that kids were actually starved from the parents' attention, because we were leading such busy lives. COVID have removed a lot of those roadblocks that we had to be able to spend more time. And the kids are just benefiting from that. But I'm not a psychologist. I work in data and insights. So I think it's probably best to kind of hand over to Amanda now, who is a psychologist and who can back up a lot of the stats that we saw here.
Thanks, Alice. Well, maybe there might be a career change coming for you. Who knows? But look, I think if we think about those stats that Alice just mentioned, it's really telling us about that family time becoming really special for families. And why then is this such a special audience then for brands? Well, reflecting on those stats, we can see that even from a neurochemical perspective, these families are having these incredibly positive experiences together. So, in these instances, we know that is, as I said, neurochemically changing how things work in our brain, and that is then allowing these families to have these really happy memories. It's a positive experience. It's changing the way they feel on a physiological level. And so if you think about those nice warm fuzzy feelings that the families are having together, and then pairing that with, say, exposure to a particular brand, we're then seeing kind of like your Pavlov's dogs, your classical conditioning. We're pairing these two things together. And then that, if you're not familiar with Pavlov's dogs, that's basically going to make the brand feel or seem and appear a lot more favourable in the view of the audience. So, I guess that's one part of why the audience is special. Also then thinking of just the fact that this is a new audience, the parent-child together as a specific little segment. So we can look at things there in terms of the parent interests trickling down, becoming a shared interest between this the parent-child, and then that audience now has a new set of interests perhaps. Even looking at these meaningful connections that the families are making, or these positive experiences that they're having, it's providing then opportunities for brands to jump in and be involved in those really positive experiences. So really just thinking about it in terms of that positive experience, and then also looking at, like Alice touched on, in terms of influence. So, we know that the child's going to have a strong influence. I can certainly speak on part of that as a mum. So, we know that that's really likely. And this is now giving brands the opportunity, I suppose, to tailor campaigns specific to this audience, knowing this information. So, I think if we are going to look at successfully engaging with this particular segment, we really want to be able to understand the child and adolescent development. We want to know how families are interacting at different developmental stages, because it changes. That parent-child relationship is going to be different depending on the age of the child. So we really want to understand that and understand the context around that relationship in those different stages. We also want to understand, I suppose, how the co-viewing can combine with some other factors that are really needed for brand loyalty. And I guess this is the opportunity for brands to really show up with relevance in terms of being involved in these occasions for families. I also think that there's a lot of parents out there that just want to get it right, and this is a really good opportunity, because if you're co-viewing with your child, you are going to get a lot more information about what their preferences are at the moment. I just said their interests and things change as they develop through the different stages. So this is giving parents the chance to be really on top of what their kids are into. And then obviously we know with the purchase influence from the kids, it's setting things up quite nicely. So we really, it's all about understanding this audience if we want to engage with them, and really thinking about, for kids in terms of their brand loyalty. We know that happens when they have been able to form a really meaningful connection with a brand, and that is, that's what is transforming that brand awareness that they have when they're sort of up to about 3 years old, into the actual loyalty, which is what we're really hoping for. So when we're thinking about, brand loyalty, and, we like to kind of really analyze each of these different developmental stages, we will need to dig a little bit deeper into this audience. We want to really encourage those meaningful connections at each developmental shift, and we really want to be aware of how co-viewing does change in each stage. So, the parenting journey is developing as well as the child's actual development. So we want to be able to speak to parents as that journey is progressing for them, as they're becoming more developed as parents, I suppose. So it's really important for brands to be prepared with relevant content and language for each of those different contexts. So you can see, on the slide about the differences in terms of, the child influence, and I suppose just in terms of where the interests are coming from for the content of co-viewing. So when the kids are younger, it's going to be sort of very much driven by their interests. I remember, like Alice said, watching a lot of Frozen. And as they're getting older, we're really then seeing that the parent influence is then going to get supplemented by peer influences. So suddenly friends and what they're interested in and what they're saying becomes really, really important. And in those early adolescence years, because these guys are trying to form their identity and work out who they are as someone that's a little bit separate from the parents. So co-viewing at this stage is really about trying to stay connected as a family in those early adolescence years, and, really trying to use those teens' interests, or, to stay connected and show the child that you're kind of that you understand them, because that's what they really need. And then, moving on to the what we like to call it, totally awesome, the world of firsts. So, the middle and late adolescence is when these teenagers are having all these experiences that are the first time they've ever done it. So, it's the first time that they've had a job, or their driver's license, or a bank account. And this is an incredible opportunity, because remember, we talked about the warm fuzzies before. There's going to be that big emotion around these first occasions for these teenagers with their families. And this is a chance for brands to really be able to develop that relationship. If they're involved in that momentous occasion, then that's a definite opportunity to be forming a lifelong relationship with this audience. So we'll definitely see that as the kids are getting older, the dedicated kind of family connection time is likely to sort of be around those lovely co-viewing rituals that might have been created when they were a little bit younger. So I guess that kind of brings us to sort of, thinking about, kind of takes us back to the start. We saw that these habits changed during COVID. We saw the increase in the co-viewing that was kind of forced upon us when we're stuck inside our houses. And the outcome has been really positive for families because they're having those, moments together and participating in the media activities as one. Yeah. And Alice, what did you kind of think about that?
Yeah, so, well, obviously I agree with you.
That's what I think together.
I think the point that I wanted to quickly jump in is and say the research that you saw today is actually breaking. I haven't even shown the internal sales team the research yet. So they're probably a little bit angry at me because I'm showing this to market first. But we saw that this new audience segment was obviously of significant value and significant importance, because obviously our kids and teens protection and what's their best interest at heart is what we're all about at Totally Awesome. And so this was a segment that we really wanted to research. Now, we can't say whether or not this co-viewing segment is going to last for years, because that kind of responsibility kind of falls on what happens with COVID and whether or not Amanda, I know I've asked you this before, but it slipped my mind. There's a certain amount of times that somebody needs to do something before it becomes just normal behavior. And, because we've been in COVID lockdown for so long, I'm pretty sure that some of these family bonding exercises that you do now have carried through and will possibly continue to carry through. So, but this is something that we will be researching quite closely and keeping track of.
Yeah, I've actually got that's a good segue, because I think the two questions that I have are around the ongoing behaviour and whether these things will change. And I'll ask the first question to Alice around privacy. And I think that there's always been a bit of a fear from parents and kids using screens around privacy and the controls that sit behind the things that they're viewing, or where they can kind of go off in other areas that probably aren't as safe as they could be. Do you think now that there's a lot more co-viewing and there's a bit of a natural privacy lock that sits on there, which is the parent co-viewing with the kid, do you think that will mean that this could be a sustainable area, that with more co-viewing, some of those privacy controls go out the window a little bit because the parent's there and they'll see it as something more acceptable to do as a family unit?
Yeah, so I definitely see that the parents being involved more is a privacy protection barrier, if I was to make up a name for it there. But the other important thing to note, and it's something that we don't really give them credit enough for, but kids and teens are more tech savvy and more internet savvy in particular areas than us adults are at all. And we actually did some research around kids' opinions around what their biggest concern is when they're online. And in fact, data privacy is one of the top concerns. So cyberbullying in a few countries was number one, but data privacy was one of the top concerns. So they're aware of it. And it's interesting, if you were to have a conversation about data privacy with a 14-year-old and then my 70-year-old mother, she'd kill me, she's actually 69, sorry mum, But you'd actually find that the 14-year-old would be completely more clued in with what happens with their data. It's because they've grown up with it. So I think there's two kind of angles here. The kids are a lot smarter when it comes to data privacy. Obviously, these are more the teens than the younger kids. But with the parents being more involved, they're less likely to stumble into areas. Or, there was a case recently where a 10-year-old was groomed on was it Fortnite, the game? Yeah. So you're less likely to come across that if the parents are involved with actual gaming online activities.
And actually, if I can jump in, I mean, the other information feeding into that as well is that it actually provides parents the opportunity to kind of coach their kids through those difficult situations as well. So we know that co-viewing is one of those forms of parents educating their kids. So if those situations do still come up, their kids are so much better set up in the future because they've had that opportunity to practice it and know what to say because their parent was with them, coaching them through it.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. And I think that the point around coaching and being able to educate on the fly is something really interesting as well for parents. So the final question that I have, again, around the changing behaviour is around the fact that we've probably got a lot more channels and a lot more of those co-viewing things that we do now. So it's not just about what we did in the past, which was sitting around the TV and watching something together or watching, a movie together, which often really lean back moments. I don't know if it's my perception, but you don't really have a lot of conversations always around those kinds of moments. Yes, you're sitting together and yes, you're experiencing something together, but there's not always that wealth of conversation. And I think that's something that I've really valued in my time with my kids being at home more and they're growing up, is that there's a lot more conversation happening. And there's a lot more now with co-viewing, a lot more lean in moments, and whether that's gaming or whether that's different formats that we're using. Do you think that those lean in moments will actually stay and provide a much more richer place for those conversations to happen between their parents and kids, and also opportunity for brands? Brands always want to be part of the conversation, not just in that kind of that branding space. So I think we can finish on that question, but interested to hear your opinion, Andrew, on that.
Yeah, and it's funny you say it, because what we know about co-viewing and families is that it tends to form part of the narrative for a family. Think about growing up, you would say things like, oh, remember that night we stayed up all night and watched blah, 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 or, remember that time that we did X, Y, Z. And we know that those events really shape the narrative of a family, and they become part of the family's like collective narrative or collective memory even. So I think you're kind of bang on in saying that it's giving us the opportunity to create a lot more of that. And if there's not conversation in the moment, I think there's going to be a lot of conversation around it outside of the moment as well. So, we are going, and I mean, we can't change last year. So those conversations are already going to be happening. And I know in my family, they are, we're already talking about the habits that were formed around co-viewing last year. So I do think that there's memories that were formed last year that are going to be continually spoken about and formed part of those narratives for families that will continue on. Will the behavior continue on? It's hard to say. I hope it does, because I think it's really good for families. And I think it would be really surprising if it didn't continue. You don't have to look very far to see how positive people's feedback has been about the sum of the positives they've been able to pluck out of the COVID experience. And, there's definite sort of commentary around people wanting to hold on to that. So I think it's creating a whole new landscape that's really going to give brands the opportunity to be, as you say, Josh, part of that conversation that might be spoken about, for 20 years within a family. And we know that these kind of co-viewing rituals are often become part of the really momentous occasions like Christmas or birthdays and things like that. A family might watch a specific movie every Christmas, and there's another really important moment, I suppose, for that narrative to continue. So, fingers crossed it does stay. I'll be really surprised if we don't see some really big changes.
Cool. Well, thank you. And I'll wrap it up there. I think, as I said at the start, it's a really interesting opportunity to not just think of this as an acceleration of a habit that was happening before, but true behavior change. And for brands to be involved in behavior change, as you say, Amanda, kind of sticks in people's heads for a long time to come. So hopefully that was helpful to everyone. Thanks, Alice and Amanda, for joining us today. And we'll see everyone next time.